Chapter 19: The Magic of Self-Murder. For the movie audience, the suicide of a star was the ultimate scandal. While not condoning adultery, loose living, multiple marriages, alcoholism, and drug addiction, the public could still, in such cases, prove forgiving if the star's image had projected enough warmth and sympathy. But for a star or even a familiar featured player or character actor to commit self-murder was unthinkable. They had money and fame, everything we wanted, and it still wasn't enough. They must have been sick. And sick they often were. Along with the occasional suicide de passion, the long list of Tinseltown self-murderers includes those who had lost or were losing their health, as well as those who were scared shitless of losing their youth. Their appeal. The still ravishingly beautiful Pierre Angeli killed herself at 39 because being 40 would be the end of everything. Illness for a physical debility would show up on a camera with the greatest of all curses. Suicide often seemed preferable to a slow recovery for those who had been brainwashed and brain damaged by their own beauty and glamour, and for whom the loss of the public or of fan mail of image was the loss of self. The film industry's suicides were in the majority actors and actresses, few aging editors, wrinkled soundmen, arthritic script girls, senescent makeup artist, that's a funny word, or grips unlucky in love reached for sleeping pills or revolvers. Pills were the vehicle of the choice for stars, male and female, desiring a quick trip to that great projection room in the sky. Most of those who used guns were men. The drowned were men. Suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning seems to have been an exclusively masculine affair as well. Self-murder by carbon monoxide poisoning. Character actor Tyler Brooke got into his car on March 2, 1943, turned on the gas, and died. His most notable roles had been in Howard Hawes' Fazil and Cecil B. DeMille's Dynamite, in which he played the life of the party, and in Ruben Mamoulian's Love Me Tonight as the composer. Spencer Charters, the popular comic actor who often played judges, got in his car on January 25, 1943, gobbled some sleeping pills, turned on the gas, and died during a 36-year stage career. He had appeared in 479 plays and was in dozens of George M. Cohan's comedies. He created the role of Jerome Underwood in Florence Ziegfeld's Broadway musical hit Whoopee and was brought to Hollywood to repeat the role with Eddie Cantor in Sam Goldwyn's two-actor Technicolor version of Whoopee, choreographed by Busby Berkeley. Charters appeared in over 200 films. He can be seen in The Front Page, Palmy Days, Wonder Bar, The Raven, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town as the Mal, The Hurricane as the Judge, Young Mr. Lincoln as Judge Bell, Drums Along the Mohawk as Fisk the Innkeeper, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, among others. In one of his best films, Roland West's The Bat Whispers, Charter appears alongside Chester Morris, another candidate for suicide. Both Charters and Tyler Brooke appear in Henry King's In Old Chicago, which makes the disaster movie a double carbon monoxide suicide film. Oh boy. Jack Dougherty was a handsome featured player in action pictures and westerns during the 20s. Chain Lightning, The Burning Trail, Arizona Express. But that was perhaps even better known as the husband of actress Virginia Brown Fair, and then of the beautiful alcoholic star Barbara Lamar, who died from a drug overdose. Dougherty attempted suicide in 1933 and bungled it. If at first you don't succeed, as they say. On May 16, 1938, he got in his car, turned on the gas, and died. Autocide. Charles Butterworth was one of the more fluttery and likable comedians to grace American screen during the Golden 30s. Butterworth was usually cast as a timid and scatterbrained bachelor of means who hardly ever got the girl. He was born in India in 1896, studied law at Notre Dame, and for a brief period was a practicing journalist. Acting was his ultimate goal, however, and after several years in Broadway, musicals, and comedies, he made his film debut in Hollywood in 1930. He appeared in Boris Karloff and John Barrymore in Michael Curtis' The Mad Genius, and Ruben Mamoulian's masterpiece, Love Me Tonight. He is Jeanette MacDonald's mooncalf suitor, the Count of Savignac. His other films include The Cat and the Fiddle, Magnificent Obsession, The Boys from Syracuse, Second Chorus, and This is the Army. And Every Day is a Holiday, Butterworth buys the Brooklyn Bridge from con woman Mae West. This West vehicle was a 3-suicide movie. It also features Herman Bing and West's lover Johnny Indrisano, both of whom eventually put an end to their days. Butterworth's death was officially listed as an accident, but he did, in point of fact, kill himself. Dusty Negulesco, wife of director Gene Negulesco, a close friend of both Butterworth and his bosom buddy, humorist Robert Benchley, recalls that the actor was inconsolable after Benchley's death. A few months after Benchley's death, he went out and killed himself in his car on June 14, 1946. Death by drowning. John Bowers was a handsome leading man in many silent movies. He is largely forgotten today. Norman Maine is a household word for a movie fan who can forget Judy Garland affirming, "This is Mrs. Norman Maine." Yet Norman Maine was John Bowers, or rather the life and tragic death of John Bowers, were the source of all three movie versions of A Star is Born. Bowers was born John Bowersox in Indiana and entered films in 1916. He married Marguerite de la Motte, a petite brunette star who had studied dance with Pavlova and who came to prominence in several roles opposite Douglas Fairbanks. Bowers and de la Motte appeared together in several films: Richard the Lionhearted, Pals in Paradise, and Ragtime. Bowers was one of several actors tested for the title role in Ben-Hur. He didn't get the job, and with coming of sound, his career took a nosedive. De la Motte divorced him. He appeared in 3 early talkies in supporting roles of little importance and then could find no movie work at all. He lost all his savings when he backed a flying alcohol that flopped. Let me rewind. He lost all his savings when he backed a flying school that flopped. Oh my God. He became an alcoholic and one day told a friend he was going to kill himself by getting in a boat and sailing away into the sunset. His favorite hobby was yachting. He did just that. At age 36, the ex-leading man rented a sailboat on November 15, 1936, and a few days later his body was washed into the beach at Malibu. The first version of A Star is Born with Janet Gaynor as Vicki Lester and Frederick March as Norman Maine was made shortly after the suicide of Bowers, with the fresh event in everyone's mind, especially that of Dorothy Parker, who wrote the screenplay. The film is, of course, a rising star, falling star of a small-town girl who achieves fame and Oscardom in Hollywood. Her ex-star husband walks in the Pacific. In 1936, the corpse of a shabbily dressed, unshaven bum was found floating in the Hudson River. It was James Murray, the star of King Vidor's The Crowd, one of the greatest American films ever made. Murray was born in the Bronx and studied at Yale, where he appeared in a short student film. He went to Hollywood in search of a movie career. He landed mostly extra parts and bit roles until the day in front of the MGM casting office when he caught the eye of King Vidor. Vidor had been preparing a film whose lead, though not unattractive, would be just one of the crowd, not a typical Hollywood face. When he espied Murray, he saw what he wanted. He approached him, introduced himself, gave him his card, and asked the actor to call him the following day. Murray never called. Vidor had him traced through the studio. Turned out that Murray hadn't believed that the director of The Big Parade was a director or had a job for him. He was tested, and when the test was shown to Irving Thalberg, the producer agreed with Vidor that Hollywood Extra was one of the best natural actors he had ever seen. As they traveled by train to New York where the crowd was to be shot, Murray pointed out to Vidor that the different railway stations where he had shoveled coal or washed dishes, or from where he had ridden the roads under boxcars in order to get to Hollywood, the crowd opened at the Capitol Theater in New York, where Murray had once worked as an usher. It received excellent reviews and became an instant classic. It was the last great silent movie made by MGM. It unintentionally created quite a stir by being the first American film to show a bathroom that contained a toilet. Murray then starred opposite Joan Crawford in Rosemarie as Jim, the mysterious soldier of fortune. Unfortunately, he had become a chronic alcoholic, undependable on the set, and although he was given jobs in other films, his career quickly suffered a decline. In 1933, Vidor was casting Our Daily Bread and thought of Murray for the lead. No one in Hollywood knew the actor's whereabouts. One day, the director was accosted by a panhandler on Vine Street who asked him for money for a meal. It was Jimmy Murray. Vidor gave him $10 and invited him to the Brown Derby for dinner. Murray insisted that they sit at the bar. Over a drink, Vidor asked him if he could pull himself together and if he were given the lead in Our Daily Bread. Murray said he thought he would, or that he could. When Vidor added that he would have to go to the wagon, Murray retorted, "Just because I stop you on the street and try to borrow a buck, you think you can tell me what to do? As far as I'm concerned, you know what you can do with your lousy part." He wiped his mouth on his sleeve and walked out. Vidor never saw him again. There is a scene in The Crowd in which John Sims, played by Murray, having hit bottom, is about to commit suicide and is kept from it by his little son, who playfully tugs at his sleeve, urging him to keep moving. Unfortunately, in real life, Murray had no one to tug at his sleeve. It's a little coffee break here. Oh boy. James Whale killed himself on May 25th, 1957. We've mentioned him before. From 1930 to 1936, this great director made a dozen of the most entertaining and sophisticated movies ever produced in the studios of Hollywood. Whale's suicide note was discovered by a maid, who gave it to his business manager. When he died, it was given to David Lewis, who had been Whale's companion for many years. Whale was homosexual and had a close circle of devoted and brilliant friends of both sexes, but beyond that circle, this difficult, witty, demanding, and bitchy craftsman was not well liked in Hollywood. The suicide note was kept secret for some time, and until its existence became known, there were persistent rumors of foul play concerning the director's death in his swimming pool. Whale was born in England in 1896. He began acting during World War I while in a German prisoner of war camp. He did not like war. He hated being a prisoner of the Germans, but he made the best of it. In the post-war years, he worked in the London theater as actor, set designer, and stage director. Journey's End was a play about life in the trenches. It was staged by Whale in London and on Broadway, and was a great hit in both cities. Whale was brought to Hollywood in 1930 to do a movie version of it. He settled in Hollywood and made a long series of literate and enjoyable movies in different genres, most of them for Universal. He is best known for a quartet of great horror and fantasy films. Frankenstein, it was Whale who selected Boris Karloff for the role of the monster. The Bride of Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, and The Invisible Man, which if you ever watch that movie, it is funny. All bear Whale's personal trademark, campy black humor, stylish and mobile camera work, and razor-sharp editing. His other films from the 30s give strong proof of the director's taste, imagination, and rapport with actors. Remember Last Night? A delightful comedy melodrama. By Candlelight, Waterloo Bridge, The Kiss Before the Mirror, The Great Garrick, One More River, a superbly acted courtroom drama, and his elegant and beautiful detailed Showboat with Irene Dunne, Helen Morgan, and Paul Robeson. And if that's the Showboat that I've seen that I'm thinking of, it sucks. That's just my opinion, though. It was Universal's big film for 1936. Okay, I don't think that's the movie. I think it was the later color version with different actors. But overall, Showboat, that version sucked. It was Universal's big film for 1936, and it was popular with the press and audiences. It became one of the year's top moneymakers, but trouble was brewing for the director of these masterpieces. Under the aegis of moguls Carl Laemmle and Carl Laemmle Jr., Whale had enjoyed creative independence at Universal. His films did well. He was permitted to cast and direct them in his fashion, and then supervise the final cut. In 1935, Laemmle was forced to sell the studio, and Jr. was obliged to resign as Universal's production chief. One of Jr.'s biggest triumphs had been All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930, based on the famous Eric Marais Remarque anti-war novel. It won Oscars for Best Film and Best Direction, Lewis Milestone, and greatly enhanced Universal's prestige. It's still considered one of the greatest films about World War I. In 1936, Whale was assigned the direction of another Remarque World War I novel set in Germany, The Road Back. While the film was in production, the German consul in Los Angeles wrote the 20 principal actors working on the film, the production staff, and Universal executives, threatening a German boycott of all the future films of everyone involved. Their work would be banned in Germany unless the film was canceled. It was completed as planned. Life magazine previewed it, selected it as Movie of the Week, even, and gave it a rave review. Meanwhile, the Nazi Ministry of Propaganda and increased pressure on Universal. All of the studio's films, past and present, would be banned in Germany if The Road Back was ever released without drastic changes. Everything considered offensive to the master race must be cut. And we don't want to disappoint them. Charles R. Rogers and J. Cheever Cowden had acquired the studio from the Laemmle family, surrendered to the Nazis without a fight. In this Hollywood scandal infinitely more shocking than the drug addictions or kinky dalliances of the stars of 1937, Adolf Hitler was able to dictate to an American movie studio, founded by Jews, mind you, what it should make. The film was withdrawn and emasculated. The whole sequences were butchered. A total of 21 cuts were made, and the cut sequences were replaced by foolish comic scenes with low comic Andy Devine. It was remade with a new director, Ted Sloman, and a new editor, and finally got the Nazi seal of approval. Whale, who loathed the war, and loathed the Nazis even more, was appalled. The Road Back, originally one of his finest films, was ruined. Only the butchered version has survived. That is tragic. The embittered director then worked at MGM in Columbia, where he was assigned weak scripts that he was not permitted to improve. He was rarely tactful with producers, and soon lost interest in making movies over which he had no creative control. His later films bear little trace of his directorial genius. He could not whip up much interest in second-rate stories like They Dare Not Love or Green Hell, which starred George Sanders in another eventual suicide. Although Whale had invested well in land and stocks and was secure financially, his life began to fall to pieces. Shortly after his arrival in Hollywood, he had met David Lewis, a handsome young actor who later became Irving Thalberg's personal assistant at MGM. Whale bought a house at 788 Amalfi Drive, Pacific Palisades, between Beverly Hills and Malibu, and Lewis moved in with him. Lewis enjoyed a successful career at MGM, where he was executive producer of Garbo's Camille and other major films. After Thalberg's death, he worked for a while at Warner Brothers, where he was associate producer of King's Row, which gave Ronald Reagan his best role, Where Is the Rest of Me? And Bette Davis, All This in Heaven Too. His last big movie was Raintree County. By the early 50s, his relationship with Whale had gone... That's the noise I can try and make for that. Whale spent a year in Europe where he met a young Frenchman named Pierre Vogel, who he hired as a chauffeur companion. He returned to Hollywood and announced that he would be installing Vogel in the house he shared with Lewis. Lewis moved out, his departure accompanied by some bitter squabbling. Vogel moved in, and Whale soon set him up in a filling station business. Around this time, Whale had a swimming pool built. Although he could not swim, the pool was mainly for parties at which the director enjoyed the sight of young men in bathing suits. Ooh. Whale kept a diary of his gay sex fantasies and read them to his guests at poolside parties. Not all of them were amused. Alrighty. Professionally, he was a forgotten man. For lack of film work, Whale occupied his time with painting. His main interest in life seemed to have become fine cigars. When his house caught fire once, he walked into the blazing building, ignored his paintings, and rescued a box of his precious Havanas. Okay, I like this guy. Whale's health began to fail in 1956. He suffered several strokes. He was hospitalized and stupidly and unnecessarily given shock treatments, and then he was released in early 1957. He could no longer paint, drive, or even read a book. Existence seemed purposeless. By the end of May, he had made his final decision. The director of Frankenstein found that life had become too monstrous to be lived any longer. In spite of his wealth and brilliant friends, he put on his favorite suit and sat down to his studio to pen a note. To all I love, do not grieve for me. My nerves are all shot, and for the last year I have been in agony day and night, except when I sleep with sleeping pills. I've had a wonderful life, but it is over, and my nerves get worse, and I am afraid they will no longer take me away. Or I'm afraid they will have to take me away. The future is just old age and pain. My last wish is to be cremated so nobody will grieve over my grave. No one is to blame. Jimmy. He put the note in an envelope and left it on the blotter in his studio. He walked out to the pool and threw himself in the shallow end, striking his head against the bottom. This was the first and last time James Whale used his swimming pool. I see the irony there. Anger, whale, pool, I get it. Okay, more coffee. The Gas Girls. Barbara Bates, a model born in Denver in 1925, where it made her movie debut in Salome, Where She Danced, an absurd camp cult classic film. In it, she appears with Albert Decker, another candidate for suicide. She sought an image and was advised to become a blonde. When signed by Warner Brothers in 1947, producer William Orr told her, "You're not the blonde type, be yourself." Herself, blonde or brunette, proved to be a very disturbed girl. She worked at Warner for 2 years. One of her best roles there was in June Bride with Bette Davis. She got the leading female role opposite Danny Kaye in The Inspector General. I've seen that movie with my ex, and it's corny but lovable. But much of her footage was cut at the insistence of Sylvia Fine, Mrs. K. She was unhappy at Warner's and had personal problems. She made the first of a series of suicide attempts, but LA is a company town, and the studio managed to keep reports of them out of the papers. At Fox, she worked in Cheaper by the Dozen and appeared in an important scene at the end of All About Eve as Phoebe, the ambitious girl who ingratiates herself with Ann Baxter. Phoebe is obviously a budding Eve. Her role in this memorable film was small, but it remains her best remembered part. Eve was SSS, a triple suicide movie. George Sanders and Marilyn Monroe were also set in the cast. Bates then appeared in All Ashore, directed by Richard Quine. This was an SS suicide. Ray McDonald appears in with her. Director Quine noted she was easy to work with, but moods of depression. In 1953, she appeared as Jerry Lewis's girlfriend in The Caddy, and in 1954 at MGM in Rhapsody as a music student with Elizabeth Taylor. Personal problems began to affect her work. She was taken off 2 big movies after her shooting had begun. Her last film was Apache Territory, 1958, for Columbia. She looked tired. The glow had disappeared. Her elderly English husband, Mr. Cohen, died of cancer. Bates became a dental assistant. She severed all ties with Tinseltown and returned to Denver, got a job in a hospital, and married a childhood sweetheart. Shortly afterward, on March 18, 1969, she turned on the gas. In June 1951, Fox mogul Darryl Zanuck and his wife Virginia were in Paris. They spotted actor friend Alex Darcy sitting at a sidewalk cafe on the Champs-Élysées. Darcy was a specialist in gigolo roles. Oh, nice. He was with a sexy girl who immediately interested Zanuck. Of all Hollywood's piggy moguls, Zanuck was the biggest casting couch hog. The girl was Bela Wedgier, born in Poland. At 12, the Nazis had put her in a concentration camp. In 1950, she married Albin Cavallad, a rich businessman, and frequented the gambling tables of the Riviera with them. They soon divorced. The day following the meeting with the Zaneks, Bela sent flowers to Mrs. Zanuck. Shortly afterward, Mr. Zanuck started stooping the Polish girl. She told him she told him he had to sell her clothing in order to pay off her gambling debts. Zanuck gave her $2,000 to reimburse the casinos and invited her to Hollywood. She turned up in Tinseltown in November 1952 and moved into the Zanuck Santa Monica beach house. The daughter of the house, Suzanne Zanuck, and the Polish import hated each other at first sight. Zanuck gave Bela a screen test and changed her name to Bella Darvi from Darrell in Virginia. The Zanucks and Darvi are said to have formed a menage a trois during this period. Mrs. Zanuck had had a bit of a movie career of her own earlier in life. As Virginia Fox, she appeared opposite Buster Keaton in several shorts made by the great comic in the early 20s. Fox's publicity department started issuing its standard barrels of a mendacious tripe on the new actress, all of which was scooped up by the papers. Hearst's New York Journal-American informed his readers that a newly arrived French doll by the name of Bella Darvi, who has the voice of Marlene Dietrich, the eyes of Simone Simon, and the allure of Corinne Calvet, is hitting Hollywood with the impact of TNT. She's got zip, zoom, and zowie. In Parlez-vous, she's ravissante, chi-chi, and très élégante. Okay, the way they wrote that is just stupid, but that's what it was, 19 whatever. Zanuck put the French doll in a submarine, casting her as a French scientist's daughter holed up with a bunch of horny sailors on a secret mission in Arctic waters in Sam Fuller's Hell and High Water. He then cast her as Nefer, the courtesan, in CinemaScope's version of Micah Waltari's best-selling The Egyptian. Marlon Brando was to play the male lead. A few readings were scheduled with the actors before shooting started. The night after the actors had gone through their first reading with director Michael Curtiz, Zanuck got a phone call from Brando's agent. Brando had already left for New York. He decided not to do the movie. He can't stand Bella Darvi, the agent told Zanuck. Zanuck was bitten by what the French called le démon du midi, in plain English, middle-aged macho menopause madness. That's a moniker. He started behaving like a lovesick schoolboy. At an Oriental costume party at Ciro's, who had been entertaining the boys in Korea, he got drunk, dropped his suspenders, and started doing acrobatics on the dinner table. He wanted to prove he was still a young stud. The photographers had a field day. Virginia dragged him home. The next day, Zanuck called his friend Henry Luce in New York, requesting that all pictures of his party antics be killed. Life nonetheless printed a full-page picture of the mogul doing his besotted trapeze act. Suzanne told Virginia that Pig Daddy's behavior was due to his infatuation with Darvi. Virginia threw Bella out of the house. The public threw her off the screen. Moviegoers did not respond to her. In the spite of the studio's hoopla, there were no Bella Darvi fan clubs. Her zip, zoom, and zowie had somehow disappeared on the way from Fox's PR department to the movie theaters. The critics spoke of her as unconvincing, charmless, giving no sign of magnetism, contributing very little to the movie. The Egyptian was judged a pretentious, risible parody. Bella returned to France. Zanuck followed. It was the beginning of the end of his career, although he would hit the jackpot once again with The Longest Day. He had been head of production at Fox for 20 years, but times were changing. The old Hollywood was about to hit the skids. Instead of remaining there to consolidate his position, Zanuck was off in Europe chasing pussy. In 1956, he resigned as production head at Fox. He was going to make independent films in which roles could be written for his mistresses. That sounds like a good deal. Why not? Darvi was soon back in action at the gambling tables of Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo, guy. Talk about one of the most outdated exotic places that no one talks about anymore is Monte fucking Carlo. This is me talking. Like it's that is such a dead destination. I love it. I love the fact that no one cares about that anymore. And no, I've never been, but if I was offered a free trip to go, of course I would go. Whatever. Darvi was soon back in action at the gambling tables of Monte Carlo and lost a fortune. Zanuck was short for cash. He was obliged to borrow money from Howard Hughes to pay off Bella's debts. His romance with Darvi finally ended with much bitterness. He consoled himself with Juliette Grieco and then with Irina Demick and Genevieve Giles. Darvi attempted suicide in Monaco in August 1962, at Roquebrune in April 1966 and June 1968 in her Monte Carlo hotel and botched each attempt. She was then put in a clinic on the Riviera. Her face was blotchy, splotchy, and puffy. She did not look chichi and très élégante. Monaco's Hotel de Paris had kept her clothing in lieu of an unpaid hotel bill. Zanuck paid the bill. She went right back to the gambling tables and found a new gent to pay her debts, temporarily. She was soon friendless, broke, and again deep in debt. Zanuck would no longer bail her out. Her number finally came up on September 10th, 1971. She opened the gas taps of the cooking stove in her modest Monte Carlo apartment. A week later, her stinking, decomposed corpse was discovered. Oh my God. In 1931, the public saw a pert teenage ingenue Claire Maynard in 2 Fox films. Henry King's Over the Hill, a tearjerker about mother love with Mae Marsh and James Dunn, and the movie Good Sport, in which Miss Maynard could be seen alongside John Bowles, Mina Gomble, and Hedda Hopper. The petite blonde had been born in Brooklyn and while modeling in a dress shop had caught the eye of a Fox talent scout. Fox did not renew her contract, and after a few years of stage work, she felt herself over the hill and was not a good sport about it. She turned on the gas in July 1941. A 21-gun salute to Hollywood suicides. Tall, lithe, and handsome, Ross Alexander was born in Brooklyn in 1907. He appeared on Broadway in Let Us Be Gay, was signed by Paramount and brought to Hollywood in 1932. Most of the rest of his career was spent at Warner Brothers, where his major films were Frank Borzage's Flirtation Walk as Oski, Max Reinhardt, A Midsummer Night's Dream as Demetrius, and Michael Curtis's Captain Blood as Jeremy Pitt, with Errol Flynn. Actress Alida Friel, his first wife, had little success with her career. She killed herself with a rifle in 1935. He then married screen actress Anne Nagel, who appeared with him in several films. On January 2nd, 1937, the 29-year-old actor who was deeply in debt entered the barn on his ranch and shot himself in the head. Later that year, Ronald Reagan began his career at Warner Brothers. It has been said that Reagan was signed by the studio as a replacement for Alexander and that Reagan's voice and manner somewhat resembled that of the dead actor. They both had radio announcers' voices. The difference was that Alexander had charm and talent. Shots fired at Ronald Reagan. Although Pedro Armendáriz was considered a Mexican actor, his mother, Della Hastings, was American. When she died, he went to live with her relatives in San Antonio. Hey, that's where I'm from. Then studied engineering at California Polytech. After becoming Mexico's top male star, he appeared in over 40 American movies. His virile presence was an asset to several John Ford pictures: The Fugitive, Fort Apache, and 3 Godfathers. He appeared in John Huston's We Were Strangers, and as the Sultan in Michael Curtis's Francis of Assisi. In 1952, he was awarded a Mexican Oscar. In 1955, he worked on The Conqueror, a cursed film about Genghis Khan. It starred his close friend, John Wayne, which was shot on location in Nevada near the site of an atomic bomb test. Oh my goodness. Its director, Dick Powell, and 2 of his stars, Wayne and Agnes Moorehead, died of lung cancer. The female lead, Susan Hayward, died from a brain tumor. While working on From Russia with Love, Armendáriz learned that he had lymph cancer. On June 18, 1963, he was admitted to the UCLA Medical Center. He shot himself in the hospital with a gun he had smuggled in. Mrs. Armendáriz said her husband generally carried a gun with him. Coffee. I need coffee. I'm leaving this in. It's Thanksgiving. We got nothing to do. Come on. Donald Red Berry saw the light of day as Donald Berry da Costa in 1912 in Houston. He was a football star in high school, then acquired some stage experience and made his movie debut in a clumsy 1936 RKO cheapie, Night Waitress. His career really got going in 1940 when he appeared in the title role with The Adventures of Red Ryder, a serial, and became a popular star of Republic Westerns. In 1942, Motion Picture Herald Fame poll voted him one of the top 10 money-making Western stars. He was featured in Sinners in Paradise, directed by James Whale, who we just mentioned, in several films of Howard Hawks, such as The Crowd Roars, Only Angels Have Wings, and Rio Lobo. During the Red Scare hysterics of the McCarthy period, producers asked him to change his name. When he refused, stories were planted in the fan magazines explaining that Berry was not nicknamed Red because of his politics, but because his flaming red hair, which was bright as that of Susan Hayward, with whom he had been seen in I'll Cry Tomorrow. Berry directed and starred in Jesse James's Women in 1953, and he can also be seen in Orca, an SOS tidal wave. He married actress Peggy Stewart. On July 17, 1980, after an argument with his wife, Berry sadly shot and killed himself. Screenwriter, producer, and director Paul Byrne wrote scripts for Lubitsch, The Marriage Circle, and von Sternberg before he became Irving Thalberg's top assistant at MGM, where he supervised the production of many of Garbo's films. When he married Jean Harlow in 1932, he was twice her age. This talented man seems to have had a potency problem. A bare 2 months after their wedding, he shot himself in the head with a .38 pistol in his wife's bedroom. The suicide note apologized to Harlow for the events of the previous night. Apparently, Byrne had attempted to penetrate the platinum blonde star with a dildo. Herman Bing was one of the most lovable and amusing character comics in the history of cinema. He was born in Frankfurt. His father, Max Bing, was a well-known operatic baritone. Herman appeared in vaudeville and circuses in Germany. In 1926, he arrived in Hollywood in the entourage of great German director F.W. Murnau, who had invited Fox to his country. Whatever. Who had been invited to this country by Fox. I'm leaving that in. I don't care. He worked as a writer and assistant for Murnau and also served as the director's major domo and scapegoat. When Murnau was killed in an auto accident near Santa Barbara, Bing and some colleagues were followed close behind in Bing's car. Murnau was on his way to New York for the world premiere of Taboo. He had been told by an astrologer not to go by car. He was warned that if he did, there would be a catastrophic accident. He changed his plans and decided to go by boat from San Francisco, which would get to New York via the Panama Canal. The fatal accident occurred on the way to the boat. Fox production chief Winfield Sheehan offered Bing an acting job after Murnau's death. He rolled his R's at great length and endeared himself to audiences by deliciously mutilating the English language in comic fashion. He was called the tongue-twisting dialectician. I love that title. His voice was once compared to the sound of a schnauzer talking in its sleep. Bing appeared in dozens of films including Dinner at 8, The Bowery, 20th Century, The Black Cat, Footlight Parade. As James Cagney's orchestrator, it is a joy to hear him recite in Bingian fashion the names of all the songs he can think of with Pussycat in the title. The music goes round. Great Ziegfeld, Maytime, Every Day's a Holiday with Mae West, and The Great Waltz. During the 30s, he often appeared in stage shows at Loew's theaters, especially at New York's Loew's State, where he was a great favorite with audiences. In the 40s, he found it difficult to get work. His daughter said, "Dad plodded from studio to studio seeking work, but his type of comedy was no longer in demand. He didn't need the money, he just couldn't stand not working. He had to act, and when he couldn't get any parts, he became unhappy and nervous." His daughter and son-in-law were sitting down to breakfast in their Los Angeles home on January 10, 1948, when they heard a shot. Bing was staying with them. They rushed to his bedroom and found the dear man on the floor with a bullet wound in his heart and an old-fashioned revolver in his hand. Suicide note to his daughter was succinct. "Dear Ellen, such insomnia. I had to commit suicide. Your daddy." His last film had been Where Do We Go From Here? Clyde Bruckman was one of the key figures in the history of American screen comedy. His first movie job was writing scripts for comedian Monty Banks. In 1921, he went to work for Buster Keaton, who always regarded him as his most talented gag man. Keaton and Bruckman remained lifelong friends. For Keaton, Bruckman wrote The Three Ages, Our Hospitality, Sherlock Jr., The Navigator, Seven Chances, and The Cameraman, among others. Keaton's best film, The General, was both written and co-directed by Bruckman. His scripts for Harold Lloyd include The Freshman, Professor Beware, The Cat's Paw, Welcome Danger, Feet First, and Movie Crazy. He easily adapted his work to the rhythm and character of whichever comedian he was working for, and always brought out the best qualities in each performer. Movie Crazy, for instance, is Lloyd's best sound film and one of the finest movies ever made about Hollywood. It also includes some remarkably kinky romantic situations. And kinky for 19... I don't think it's going to be that kinky today. Bruckman directed a few of Laurel and Hardy's best movies, Putting Pants on Philip, which involves some outrageous homosexual gags, The Battle of the Century, which the best custard pie sequence ever made, Leave 'Em Laughing, and The Call of the Cuckoo. He later directed two memorable W.C. Fields pictures, The Fatal Glass of Beer and The Man on the Flying Trapeze. As the 30s progressed, Bruckman's alcoholism lost him jobs on major movies. He worked on B pictures, wrote scripts for the Blondie series, and for some of the shorts Keaton made at Columbia. When he sold Universal a few gags he'd originally written for Lloyd's films, and they were used in 1945, Joan Davis Quickie, She Gets Her Man, Harold Lloyd, who was a multimillionaire, sued Universal and was awarded several $1 million in damages. This incident made it difficult for Bruckman to find work. He did some uninspired scripts for The Three Stooges and for Keaton's TV show. He soon became a familiar sight around Hollywood, stumbling about with a pint bottle sticking out of his pocket. In 1955, he borrowed Keaton's pistol for a little target practice. He left a note to his wife saying he was going out because he didn't want to mess up her nice living room, adding, "I have no money to pay for a funeral." He went into a phone booth on Santa Monica Boulevard and blew his brains out. Speaking of the 20s, Bruckman once said, "I often wish that I were back there with Buster and the gang, in that Hollywood, but I don't have the lamp to rub. It was one of a kind." One more coffee here. Wilford Buckland was Hollywood's first great art director and was called the founder of Hollywood cinema art. Until he arrived in Hollywood, Cecil B. DeMille had never used anyone specifically delegated to design sets. DeMille's mother recommended Buckland, who had been responsible for the scenic beauty of David Belasco's stage production. For years, he worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, often involved in bitter disputes with DeMille. Several important innovations should be credited to him, among them the use of Klieg lights. He originated interior lighting in the American film industry. Until then, directors relied on natural sunshine. Buckland's use of arc lamps produced dramatic lighting for the first time on the screen. He did the sets for DeMille's The Cheat, Joan the Woman with Geraldine Farrar, and Male and Female with Swanson. The bathrooms for DeMille's heroines, which were conceived as shrines to feminine beauty, were designed by Buckland. DeMille generally treated him abominably for years. For years, the miserly director paid his art director only $75 a week. After many bitter disputes, Buckland parted company with DeMille in the mid-20s. His greatest single achievement was the larger-than-life decor for the Douglas Fairbanks Robin Hood, 1922. In later years, he did some work for MGM, and even when past 80, went to the studio every day looking for work. The old man, by then, looked a bit like Teddy Roosevelt. In Europe, a figure like Buckland would have been loaded with honors for his contribution to the art of the film. In Hollywood, in his later years, he was neglected and jobless. The Depression left him penniless. His only wife, Wilford Buckland Jr., known as Bill, had gone to Princeton and mixed with high society. After the family fortune vanished with the Depression, and his mother, the lovely actress Vida Buckland, died of cancer, and Bill had a breakdown. The only thing he knew anything about was tennis. For a while, he had sought a living as a tennis instructor. He was a homosexual and plagued by guilt because of his father's fierce disapproval. He became an alcoholic when found sobbing on Hollywood Boulevard in an alcoholic stupor. He was taken to Camarillo, the State Institute for the Insane, where he was given shock treatment, which did him more harm than good. When he was released, his old friend Jesse Lasky Jr. got him a gopher job on the set of DeMille's Northwest Mounted Police. When the picture was finished, Bill found himself unemployed and hit the bottle again. It was clear to old Wilford that his son would never go to the wagon permanently and would never be normal. He realized that he did not have much longer to live, and that when he died, there would be no one to take care of his gay, alcoholic son. On July 18, 1946, while Bill was sleeping, his father shot him in the head with a .32 caliber Mauser automatic and then shot himself. He left a suicide note which said, "I'm taking Billy with me." Oh, jeez. Buckland had always been a great marksman. The shooting range in his cellar was one of his favorite haunts. He enjoyed teaching young men how to use a pistol. In 1917, Picture Play article on Buckland concluded with, "His hobby is shooting, and on the walls of his home are handguns of every make and description from the time guns were invented. He has the long gun from the Arab and the short blunderbuss. In spite of a heavy workload at the studio, every week he must find some time to shoot." Actor James Cardwell shot himself to death in Hollywood on February 4th, 1954. He was 33 and had appeared in The Sullivans, Tokyo Joe, He Walked by Night, Canyon Passage, and as Sergeant Hoskins in Lewis Milestone's A Walk in the Sun. Arthur Edmund Carew was born in Armenia, came to this country as a child and appeared on stage for 8 years. He entered movies in 1919 in films with Constance Talmadge, but in spite of his rugged good looks, because of this intense and somewhat spooky manner, soon became associated with horror films and melodramas in which he was most villainous. He can be seen in The Palace of Darkened Windows, The Phantom of the Opera as the Persian, The Ghostbreaker, The Claw, The Cat and the Canary, Dr. X, and The Mystery of the Wax Museum. His last film was Charlie Chan's Secret, 1936. He also appeared in Garbo's first American movie, The Torrent, and in The Gay Diplomat. Carew reached the pinnacle of his career in Trilby, 1923, in which he starred as Svengali. It was a hit with the public and critics alike. The New York Times headlined its review, "A Saturnine Svengali," and went on to note, "But charming as Andre Lafayette is as Trilby, it is Arthur Edmund Carew's revelations of Svengali that dominates this production. His makeup is as true as steel. He has the long fingers, the sharp aquiline nose, the hollow cadaverous cheeks, the black matted beard and unkempt hair of the Svengali of the book. His dark eyes are scintillating and gruesome." Shortly after making Charlie Chan's Secret, Carew suffered a paralytic stroke and ended his life with a gun on April 23, 1937. Lester Cunio's first film was Graustark, with Francis X. Bushman. He appeared in the Haunted Pajamas and then met Francelia Billington, where they were both working in a Tom Mix movie. They were married and appeared together in a few movies. Cuneo was a handsome piece of silent screen beefcake. He often played a villain, but was generally more attractive than the hero. His marriage went kaput on November 1st, 1925. A few days after his wife sued for divorce, he went to the home they had shared, had a noisy quarrel with her, then shot himself. Hunky Lester, dead at 37. Carl Dane, born in Copenhagen in 1886, was a tall, gawky, funny-looking gent who arrived in Hollywood during World War I and was cast in 2 anti-German propaganda films, My 4 Years in Germany and To Hell with the Kaiser. His film career didn't amount to much until 1925 when he hit the big time in the role of Slim, the fearless sleepjack riveter who is recruited into the army and is killed in no man's land in King Vidor's The Big Parade. The movie was a huge hit. It ran for 2 years at the Astor Theater on Broadway and did a great deal to establish MGM as a major studio. Director Vidor remarked, "The Big Parade advanced Carl Dane's way up the ladder of fame. It was a slippery ladder. Dane appeared with Tom Mix with Marion Davies and played a shifty Arab in The Son of the Sheik with Valentino. Toward the end of the silent era, he appeared in a series of popular comic shorts with George K. Arthur. His last important movie was George Hill's The Big House, 1930. Unfortunately, Dane could not get rid of his impenetrable Danish accent. He made a serial on Poverty Row, but the ex-MGM star ended up running a hot dog stand near the main entrance to the studio. Oh my God. I do love hot dogs, though. I'd eat that guy's hot dog. Come on. Former actor to another. On April 14th, 1934, he took out a batch of his old press clippings, oh boy, his rave reviews, his MGM contracts, and spread them out on a table in his tacky furnished room. He stretched out on the clippings, and he put a bullet through his head. Poor guy. Bob Duncan, born in Kansas in 1904, was a minor league cowboy star of Monogram and PRC Poverty Row westerns during the 40s. Tumbleweed Trail, Rainbow Over the Rockies, Song of the Sierra, who got the draw on himself. Dead with his own gun, March 13th, 1967. Handsome blonde Texan Tom Foreman broke into films with Lasky and then acted in and directed Paramount movies. He played opposite Gloria Swanson in DeMille's For Better or Worse, 1919, and directed Lon Chaney in Shadows, 1922. He was recuperating from a nervous breakdown at the home of his parents in Venice, California, when he put a gun to his heart and pulled the trigger on November 7, 1926. Dead at 34, his last screen appearance had been opposite Viola Dana in Kosher Kitty Kelly. Claude Gillingwater was born in Missouri in 1870. Apprenticed to a lawyer uncle, he ran away from home to join a wandering repertory company that was passing through town. He worked on the New York stage, then made his film debut in 1921, opposite Mary Pickford and Little Ford Fauntleroy. The actor was 6 foot 3 inches and therefore a perfect visual foil for Pickford in this movie, in which she was a 24-year-old woman playing a 10-year-old girl. His great height made her seem more diminutive and convincingly little girl boyish. He bulked large later next to Shirley Temple in Poor Little Rich Girl. Most people looked smaller next to Gillingwater anyway. He worked with William Haynes in Vidor's Three Wise Fools. One of his last silent movies was Ham and Eggs at the Front. His talkies include Dumbbells and Ermine, Daddy Longlegs with Janet Gaynor, Capra's Broadway Bill, A Tale of Two Cities as Jarvis Lorry, and John Ford's The Prisoner of Shark Island. In 1936, while acting in a scene with Jack Oakey in Florida Special at Paramount, he fell from a platform, injured his back, and found it difficult to perform from then on. His wife died. Depression took hold. On November 1st, 1939, he blew his brains out in his North Bedford Drive home in Beverly Hills. His suicide note read, "To the police, I am ending my life because in my advanced age, in my physical condition, there is no chance of ever being well again, and I will not permit myself to become a helpless, lingering invalid." Jonathan Hale was born in Canada in 1891. He worked briefly as a diplomat before entering films in 1934. He was one of the busiest character actors in Hollywood, appearing in nearly 33 movies during his 22-year career. He was often seen as a churlish businessman, and is best remembered for his performances as Mr. Dithers, Dagwood's boss, in the popular Blondie series made by Columbia. He was something of a series specialist, appearing in Charlie Chan, Saint, Maisie, Hardy Family, and Dr. Gillespie movies. In Fritz Lang's You Only Live Once, Hale was the district attorney. He was DeBege in Lang's Hangman, Also Die. He played Mr. Anthony, Robert Walker's father, in Hitchcock's Stranger on a Train, and appeared with Paul Kelly in Duffy of San Quentin. After his retirement, Hale went to live in the motion picture country house in Woodlands Halls, California. He shot himself in his cottage on March 2nd, 1966. The pistol was found next to his body. Attendants said he had been depressed for some time. Bobby Heron was born into a poor Irish family in Greenwich Village. The adolescent Bobby needed a part-time job. One of the brothers at his parochial school sent him to the Biograph studio on 14th Street. He was hired by Wallace McCutcheon, another eventual suicide, who gave him a job in the cutting room at $5 a week. He was befriended by D.W. Griffith and was cast opposite Mary Pickford, Lillian Gish, and then Mae Marsh in Judith of Bethulia. He played 4 roles in The Birth of a Nation. Wow. His best performance was that of the boy in the modern-day sequence of Intolerance. His brother Charles was killed in a car crash in 1916. His sister Teresa died during an epidemic of Spanish flu. On September 1st, 1920, he was staying at the Hotel Seymour in New York, having come east for the premiere of Griffith's Way Down East. By then, it was clear that Richard Barthelmess had become Griffith's preferred male star. Barthelmess had scored a great success of the previous year opposite Gish in Broken Blossoms. Herman went to the morgue instead of to the movie. He was found dead in his room at the Seymour, a revolver at his side, a bullet in his right lung. Jose Alex Javier can be seen as Yankee Salazar in Tay Garnett's 1943 MGM production Baton. He went back to Baton with John Wayne in 1945. Oh my God, okay, that's an actual movie. In the RKO movie of the same name. Again with Wayne, he appeared as Benny in They Were Expendable, John Ford's saga of PT boats in action. Javier shot himself December 18, 1945. His last film was released in 1946 after his death. It was called, sadly, Nobody Lives Forever. George Hill entered films and Biograph and worked as a stagehand, screenwriter, cameraman. He saw action at Gallipoli during World War I. He was tall, dark, and handsome. He started directing in 1921 and made Tell It to the Marines, one of Lon Chaney's better movies. He was directed to the superb night warfare scenes of Vidor's The Big Parade, but his masterpiece was The Big House in 1930, the first important talking pictures about criminals. In 1934, Thalberg sent a film crew to China headed by Hill, who had been selected to direct The Good Earth. He brought back a lot of good footage of Chinese cities and countrysides and 2 live Chinese water buffalo. One fine morning in 1934, a few days before shooting was scheduled to begin on The Good Earth, George Hill blew his head off with a hunting rifle. No further details on that. When D.W. Griffith arrived at the Biograph studio on New York's 14th Street, the house director was Old Man McCutcheon, who had directed some of the very first Peep Show movies. The old man bought a script from Griffith and hired him as an actor. The old man, however, worked at a slow pace, turned out only one movie a week. Turning out only one movie a week? Good God. Okay, fine. That's bad. When Griffith was given a chance at directing, he worked quickly and was soon making all of Biograph's films. The rest is history. At the time of Griffith's arrival at the studio, the old man's son, Wallace McCutcheon Jr., was working there at a variety of jobs. He left Biograph late in 1908. During World War I, although he was an American, he enlisted in the English Army. His valor earned him a promotion to the rank of major. He was wounded, shell-shocked, and had to have a silver plate put in his skull. Oh my goodness. After the war, he returned to New York, married Pearl White, and acted opposite her in the 1919 serial The Black Secret, and in a 1920 feature, The Thief. They were later divorced, and shortly afterward, McCutcheon was admitted to a private sanitarium. On January 27, 1928, he killed himself with a bullet to the head. A revolver was found in his hand. His pockets were full of clippings about Pearl White. 3 actors, Nelson McDowell, Maurice Tournier's The Last of the Mohicans, Scaramouche with Roman Navarro, College Swing with Bob Hope, John Mitchell, Mr. Skeffington with Betty Davis, and Burt Morehouse, Sunset Boulevard, The Big Hangover. Shot and killed themselves on November 3, 1947, January 19, 1951, and January 26, 1954, respectively. Superman kills himself. No, not a new episode. This was for real. In 1959, George Reeves did what no one else had ever managed to do. He killed Man of Steel. Reeves, real name George Besselo, was born in Iowa in 1914 and trained for an acting career at the Pasadena Playhouse. He first turned up on the screen as Brent Tarleton in Gone with the Wind, then appeared in Torrid Zone, Argentine Nights with the Andrews Sisters, Walsh's Strawberry Blonde, Blood and Sand as Captain Pierre Lauren, Jungle Jim, DeMille's Samson and Delilah as the Wounded Messenger, Lang's Rancho Notorious, and Superman and the Mole Men. The muscular 6'2" frame and prowess in judo were important assets in helping him land the job of TV Superman. The series was not only popular here, it became one of the top programs in Japan, and Reeves received a letter from Emperor Hirohito telling him how much he enjoyed the show. Reeves later became discouraged over the slump in his career and after he stopped making the Superman series. There were a few curious aspects to his death. He shot himself through the head with a 9mm Luger on June 16, 1959, and was found naked on the bed in his Benedict Canyon home. A few seconds before the shot was heard, his fiancée, New York socialite Lenore Lemon, predicted to visitors in the house that Reeves was going to kill himself. Miss Lemon had been downstairs when about 1 a.m. some friends rang the bell. Reeves came down, irate at being disturbed at that late hour, and threatened to throw them out. When he went upstairs, Miss Lemon remarked, "Now he's opening the drawer to get the gun." A shot rang out. "See, I told you. He shot himself." 2 months before his that's so weird. 2 months before his death, Reeves had gone to the LA District Attorney's office to report that he was being harassed by an anonymous phone caller whom he believed to be Mrs. Toni Mannix, the wife of Eddie Mannix, the vice president of Lowe's Incorporated and former general manager of MGM. Yet Reeves left the bulk of his estate to Mrs. Mannix. His fiancée blamed Superman for Reeves' death. She said Superman had so dominated the actor's life, he had become so identified with the role that it was impossible for him to get other movie parts. That's so weird. Leo Slezak, born in Czechoslovakia, was one of the greatest operatic tenors of the century. For more than 25 years, he was a mainstay of the Vienna Opera, the idol of the Viennese. He often sang Wagnerian roles at the Met. He was also a movie star and appeared in many pictures made in Austria and Germany. Rendezvous in Wien, Die Blonde Carmen. Leo's son, Walter Slezak, was born in Vienna in 1902 and was a medical student where he was discovered by director Michael Curtiz. He appeared in Curtiz's epic biblical movie Sodom und Gomorrah, Queen of the Sin and the Spectacle of Sodom and Gomorrah, made in 1922. His most memorable early performance was the title role in Michael Chained, the story of the third sex. This masterpiece, directed by the great Danish director Carl Dreyer in Berlin in 1914, was the first important film ever made on the subject of homosexuality. It concerns the love of a middle-aged painter, played by the Danish movie director Benjamin Christensen, for his young male model, played by Slezak. When he appeared in Michael, Slezak was slim, youthful, and epicene. During the next few years, he gained a great deal of weight and could no longer be cast as a romantic lead. He found himself thrust into character parts. He came to this country and appeared often in Broadway shows, making his American movie debut in 1942. His role in Fanny on Broadway earned him both a Tony and a New York Critics Award in 1955. In 1957, he appeared in The Gypsy Baron at the Met. He can be seen alongside Ronald Reagan in Bedtime for Bonzo. and appeared with another eventual suicide, Barbara Bates, in the Danny Kaye vehicle, The Inspector General. One of his most impressive performances was as Judy Garland's fiancé, Don Pedro Vargas, in the Vincente Minnelli's The Pirate. The Pirate is also a SSS, a three-suicide movie. In addition to Slezak, its credits include costume supervision by Irene and instrumental arrangements by Conrad Salinger. Both of these talented artists killed themselves. During World War II, Adolf Hitler movie Fan par excellence saw Walter as the U-boat captain in Hitchcock's Lifeboat and in Jean Renoir's anti-Nazi propaganda film This Land Is Mine. Der Fuhrer did not like what he saw. He fined Leo Slezak 100,000 marks. The father was made to pay for the sins of the son. Walter Slezak's last movie role was in The Mysterious House of Dr. C, 1976, in which he played Dr. Coppelius. He was afflicted by a heart ailment which depressed him considerably. In 1983, he shot and killed himself with a .38 in his home in Manhasset, Long Island. Stunt woman Mary Wiggins, who in the course of her career had survived many a dangerous scene, died instantly when she shot herself in her North Hollywood home on December 10, 1945. Gig Young was born in Minnesota, real name Byron Barr. Byron Barr sounds better than Gig Young. Why did he do that? Well, whatever. His father was a cook in a reformatory. Young Byron worked as a used car salesman, then got his acting start at the Pasadena Playhouse, where he was spotted by a talent scout from Warner Brothers. His first good role was that of an artist named Gig Young in The Gay Sisters with Barbara Stanwyck. The preview audience liked him. The studio suggested he take the name of the character. Oh, that's why. But that Byron Barr sounds better. No, fucking whatever. I didn't win. Too old. I wasn't there. Whatever. After making old acquaintance with Betty Davis, he enlisted in the Coast Guard and served 3 years. His second wife, Sophie Rubenstein, a drama coach at Warner's, died of cancer soon after their marriage. Young was an alcoholic. In Come Fill the Cup, 1951, he played an alcoholic who was saved from suicide by Jimmy Cagney. Young married Elizabeth Montgomery. In 1956, they were divorced in 1963. He won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his performance as the dance marathon pitchman in the 1969 movie They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Young suffered from skin cancer. Although not life-threatening, he eventually moved to New York because the strong Californian sun aggravated the condition. While shooting a movie in Hong Kong, he met Kim Schmidt, who worked in an art gallery there. He was 64. She was 31. They married, and 3 weeks after their wedding, in his posh duplex in the Osborne Apartments opposite Carnegie Hall on 57th Street, Young killed his new wife and himself. He was found holding a .38 revolver. The actor and his wife had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. They were carefully dressed, and there was no sign of a struggle. This led to a conjecture of a suicide pact. The police made a bizarre discovery. In addition to the murder weapon, Young's apartment contained 3 other revolvers and 350 rounds of ammunition. In 1971, Red Button said of Young, "Beneath Gig's light-hearted sophistication is a man who needs an arm around him. Gig Young himself once stated in an interview, "You can't tell about people from their outside. They've spent a lifetime covering up their fears." His last movie, the movie he was making when he met the girl he was wed and killed, was entitled The Game of Death. Death by hanging. By a curious coincidence, Albert Dekker, who hanged himself, made his movie debut in The Great Garrick, directed by James Whale, who drowned himself. He later appeared in another Whale movie as the foppish Louis XIII in the kinky The Man with the Iron Mask. This odd-looking actor was born in Brooklyn, née Albert van Dekker. While in college, he befriended Alfred Lunt and then appeared on Broadway in Eugene O'Neill's Marco Millions, in which Lunt starred as Marco Polo. From 1944 to 1946, Dekker served as Democratic Assemblyman of the 57th District in the California Legislature. Dekker looked spooky naturally and was often cast in spooky roles as a result. The most memorable of all was the title role in Dr. Cyclops, directed by Ernest Schoedsack, one of the creators of King Kong. In it, Dekker played the mad Dr. Thorkel, who lived somewhere up the Amazon and who reduced anyone foolish enough to visit him to the size of a small doll. Dr. Thorkel was bald and googly-eyed, very nearsighted. He wore huge lenses that distorted his face. When he picked up the other characters whom he had miniaturized, Dekker looked like a squinty, clean-shaven King Kong. He also made history in his flick. He was the first monster in full 3-strip Technicolor. He also appeared in Suspense, The Killers, Slave Girl, Tarzan's Magic Fountain, Destination Murder, Kiss Me Deadly, East of Eden, Suddenly Last Summer, and in a great period suspense melodrama, Experiment Perilous, with Hedy Lamarr. Opposite Susan Hayward in Among the Living, he played twin brothers, one of whom is a homicidal maniac. In Seven Sinners, he got the girl for one. In Seven Sinners, he got the girl for once, and sailed off into the sunset with Marlene Dietrich, who was wearing a gown designed by Irene, who was another suicide. His last film was The Wild Bunch. Okay, that's a good movie to go out on. Holy crap. Dekker's 16-year-old son, Jan, was found shot to death in 1967 at Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Authorities listed the death as self-inflicted. On May 5, 1968, Albert Dekker was found dead in his Hollywood apartment. He was discovered bound and handcuffed, hanged from a shower rod in the bathroom. The bathroom was secured from the inside by a chain lock. The corpse was clad in women's dainty silk lingerie, and in his final moments, Dekker had written some unprintable things about himself on his body, in flaming red lipstick. Yeah, poor guy. Ziegfeld discovered the Dolly sisters dancing in vaudeville. He immediately hired them for his 1911 Follies. They were small and dark, identical twins with a somewhat oriental exotic charm. Originally Hungarians who had grown up on New York's Lower East Side, Jansky had changed her name to Jenny Dolly Rojika and changed hers to Rosie. The great Ziegfeld dressed them in skirts made of dozens of white feathers, capped them with diamond headdresses, and set them a-whirl, dancing in his shows. Diamond Jim Brady fell in love with them. Every millionaire in New York was soon at their feet. In 1915, Jenny starred in the movie Call of the Dance, made by Kalem Studios, then co-starred with her sister in Metro's The $1 Million Dollies in 1918. They went to Europe, and Jenny became the queen of the roulette tables at Monte Carlo. She lost and won fabulous sums and converted her winnings into the biggest collection of diamonds that had ever been seen on the Riviera on one human being. She was the gay butterfly. Rosie was less frolicsome than her sister. While Jenny was playing roulette, Rosie went back to the old country and spent some time doing charity work with orphans in Hungary. They then appeared together at the Casino de Paris and conquered Paris. They introduced the Charleston and the Black Bottom to Europe. They bought a chateau in Fontainebleau, where they gave wild and elaborate parties. One of Jenny's admirers was the Prince of Wales, later the Duke of Windsor. They were applauded at close range by King Christian of Denmark and King Carol of Romania. They appeared at the Paris Moulin Rouge, where they received star billing with Maurice Chevalier. Jenny fell in love with a French aviator, Max Constant. It was a mad affair, punctuated by disputes and reconciliations. After a lover's quarrel with Max, she had a fling with Gordon Selfridge, the owner of London's famous department store. He offered her $10 million if she would marry him. Well, who'd say no to that? She still loved Max, but she loved diamonds even more. She went off with Max Constant for one last weekend fling before her marriage to Selfridge. The lovers got into a car accident near Bordeaux, and Jenny was nearly killed. She spent months undergoing surgery at the American Hospital in Paris. Selfridge brought the world's most prominent plastic surgeons in an attempt to restore her beauty. It didn't work. She remained broken in spirit and body. Rosie had married a rich Chicago businessman. She and her husband brought Jenny back to America. After a few years, there was talk of a comeback, but the comeback never came. On June 1st, 1941, at the age of 48, Jenny Dolly took some drapes, made a noose from them, and hanged herself from a shower rod in her Hollywood apartment. In 1945, George Jessel, whose girlfriend Abigail Adams killed herself with a fatal quantity of seconal in 1959, produced a biopic called The Dolly Sisters for Fox. It starred Betty Grable and June Haver. The production values were lavish, but the script hardly did justice to the lives of the fabulous Dollys. Actor Frank Gaby, who appeared in Universal's Mr. Dynamite, hanged himself on February 12, 1945. He was only 49. Mae West had a weakness for boxers. Brawny pugilist John Idrisano can be seen with great Mae in one of her best vehicles, Every Day's a Holiday. Mae's two major lovers during the late 30s were Idrisano and Chalky Wright, a fighter who became a chauffeur. Idrisano and Mae lived together for some time. She completely dominated him, but enjoyed the workouts he gave her. He got La West to jog and exercised her like a boxer. Beefy Johnny also appeared in Two-Fisted, Ringside Maisie, In This Corner, and Joe Palooka in The Counterpunch, and all of which the boxing ability is on display. Some of his other movies were Lost in Harem, Lulu Bell, The Lady Gambles with Barbara Stanwyck, The Yellow Cabman, and A House Is Not a Home. Idrisano hanged himself in his San Francisco Valley home on July 9, 1968. The Christine Jorgensen story, which you might have heard of if you ever watched the movie Ed Wood. Director Irving Rapper's penultimate film was not exactly his finest cinematic hour. That surely had been Now Voyager, Bette Davis's most inspired soap opera. Rapper also directed The Gay Sisters, in which Suicide to Be, Gig Young, whom we just talked about, adopted his nom de screen. But few who saw the 1970 biopic of America's most famous sex change personality will forget it. One of his assets was a blonde cutie pie muppet named Trent Lehman, who played Christine as a boy, George Jorgensen in pre-Christine days. In one scene, George dons his mother's long white dress and smears lipstick on his cute little puss. The role led to the casting of Trent as Butch Everett in the ABC television series Nanny and the Professor, which ran for 2 seasons, 1970 to 71. It was his only real break. He became typecast as Butch, had trouble finding work as a fast-growing adolescent, and for the 10 years following Nanny, he did not hold any kind of job. He grew tired of knocking on doors, and at age 10 he had been earning $1,200 a week, and at 20 he could not find a $4 an hour job. After his suicide, his mother said it broke her heart to see how unwanted he felt, he who once had been so popular. The job rejections changed his personality. From the age of 13 he became sullen and withdrawn. When Bobby Lemon discovered that her son was hanging out with kids who were heavy users of drugs and alcohol, she decided it would do them good to get out of Hollywood. She resettled the family in their original home, Colorado Springs. Things seemed better for a while. Trent joined the Job Corps. 4 years later, in the summer of '81, he packed up and moved back to Hollywood. He became a cocaine addict. When his mother saw him again, she insisted that he attend therapy. Trent refused. On a chilly January night in 1982, Trent's old school friend Joseph Allen was returning to his home in Arletta, near North Hollywood. It was 1:45. He pulled the car into his driveway, which was just across the street from the Vena Avenue Elementary School, where he and Trent had gone to school. Trent, as a kid, had had many happy times in that schoolyard. As Allen got out of the car, he held a bizarre sight in front of his school. At first, he could not believe his eyes. Someone had tied a leather belt around his neck, climbed to the top of the chain-link fence, tied the belt of the top of the fence, pushed himself off, and died. As Allen approached, he recognized his old buddy, former child star Trent Lehman, who had come back to his old school to die. A suicide note was in his pocket. Jazz drummer and actor Ben Pollock wore several hats. He wrote songs, led a band, and appeared in early talkie shorts, notably Ben Pollock and his Park Central Orchestra. The highlights of his film career were Anthony Mann's The Glenn Miller Story in 1954 with James Stewart and June Allison, and The Benny Goodman Story in 1955. Unfortunately, Pollock hanged himself on June 7, 1971 in Palm Springs. Some more coffee. Okay. Jumpers. Screen actress Lois Bernard jumped to her death on April 25, 1945. The most celebrated Hollywood death leap, however, was that of a little lady who made only one picture. Peg Entwistle was born Lillian Millicent Entwistle in London. In 1929, she got excellent notices in the Broadway hit show Tommy and then appeared in some Theatre Guild productions. After coming to Hollywood, she appeared in one more play, The Mad Hopes, with Billy Burke, and Peg's notices were good, but the show flopped after playing 2 weeks in Los Angeles for 2 half-empty houses. She finally found a screen job in RKO's murder mystery, 13 Women, with Myrna Loy. In spite of a good cast, the movie was not a hit, and Peg did not find herself on the way up. Hollywood is a lonely place for those who haven't made it. The handshakes are reserved for those who have. After her film performed badly at the box office, Peg was told by the studio that there was nothing for her just now. She spent weeks trying to find another movie job, weeks of trying to keep a brave face, when she met people who had known her as a successful Broadway actress. Well, she found the way up after her own fashion. On September 18, 1932, she climbed on the steep slopes of Mount Lee to the great Hollywood Land sign, which spelled out in giant letters the name of Mack Sennett's ill-fated real estate venture. There were 13 letters on that sign, and it had a fatal fascination for Peg, who had ridden near it on horseback nearly every day. She left her coat and purse on the ground and climbed a ladder a workman had left right to the top of the 50-foot H. No one will ever know how long she gazed down at Hollywood that night. No one will ever know her bitter thoughts. She could see several of the studios from that height, including RKO, where for a while she had held a brief hope that fate would be kind to her. She leaped to her death. Her pitiful suicide note read, "I'm afraid I'm a coward. I'm sorry for everything." She did not know what at that moment of her suicide a note was in the mail to her from Beverly Hills Community Players. They were offering her a juicy role in her next stage production, that of a girl who commits suicide at the end of the third act. Screen actress Gladys Frazen, her career was mostly limited to the 20s, jumped from a New York apartment window on March 9, 1939. She had been married to comedian Monty Banks, who played in films with Fatty Arbuckle and later directed Laurel and Hardy in Great Guns. After his divorce from Frazen, Banks married Gracie Fields. Frazen's best film was Let No Man Put Asunder in 1924, a drama about a divorce in which she co-starred with Lou Tellegen, who also committed suicide. All right, let's move on here. Russell Gleason was the son of James Gleason, one of the most talented and best-liked character actors in American movies. James Gleason generally played grouchy urban types, cops, robbers, reporters, fight managers, with a heart of gold underneath the buff. Meet John Doe, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, Arsenic and Old Lace, The Night of the Hunter, The Last Hurrah. He met his wife, actress Lucille Gleason, when they were appearing together in a stock company run by her father. Russell was born while his parents were in stock in Portland, Oregon. When 3 months old, he was carried on stage and appeared with them in a play. There were hardly any father-mother-son combinations in the movies. The Gleasons were one of them. All three appeared together in The Higgins Family, as well as other films. Lucille can be seen as Big Tess in Klondike Annie with Mae West. She was active in politics, ran for California Assembly, and was vice president of the Screen Actors Guild. Russell made his screen debut in The Shady Lady in 1929, which starred Phyllis Haver as a fugitive from justice. Russell's first important role was the dreamy schoolboy Muller in All Quiet on the Western Front, and his last film was The Adventures of Mark Twain with Frederick March. In December 1945, he was belayed at New York's Hotel Sutton with other personnel at the Army Signal Corps Photo Center of the Astoria studio. On Christmas Day, Sergeant Gleason plunged from his fourth-floor room at the Sutton. His body landed with a thud, awakening other soldiers. Irene Gibbons, spent the first 16 years of her life on their father's Montana ranch. She went to design school and opened a simple dress shop in Los Angeles near the University of Southern California. One day, by chance, Dolores Del Rio dropped in and was struck by the high quality of Irene's work. The actress bought several frocks and told her friends about the place Irene became fashionable. In 1936, she married Elliot Gibbons, a screenwriter. Give Us Wings, Flight of the Midnight, Honeymoon Deferred, and the brother of Cedric Gibbons, the renowned supervising art director at MGM. Irene soon left her simple store to head the ultra-swanky salon at Bullock's Wilshire in downtown Los Angeles. In 1938, she began designing for the movies, mostly working at Universal. In 1941, Adrian, the genius chief fashion designer at MGM, declared that he was fed up with the studio. For years, there had been no budget limitations on his extravagant creations for glamorous MGM stars. Lately, however, he had been ordered to dress Garbo more like an ordinary American woman, and the corporate executives had started to limit his budget. Adrian left to open his own couture salon. Irene left Bullock's to succeed him as executive designer at MGM. Over the years, she created beautiful gowns for Marlene Dietrich, Elizabeth Taylor, Claudette Colbert, Hedy Lamarr, Judy Garland, Lana Turner, and many others, and became famous for her soufflé creations. Late in her career, she worked on several Doris Day films. The actress and the designer became friends. Day noticed that Irene, who had always been nervous and introverted, was drinking too much. Her husband lived out of state, and she rarely saw him. Irene had loved to shoot and go on hunting trips, but she no longer took pleasure in these activities. She confided in Day that she was in love with Gary Cooper and that he was the only man she had ever loved. Cooper died in 1961. On November 15, 1962, Irene took a room at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles under an assumed name. She cut her wrists. When this did not prove fatal immediately, she jumped to her death from the window on the room on the 14th floor. A note found in it said, "I'm sorry. This is the best way. Get someone very good to design and be happy. I love you all, Irene." Linda Christian never attained much fame as a leading lady, but via the fan magazines became quite well known because of her off-screen romance. Eventually, she married Tyrone Power. He was taken from her to the big projection room in the sky in 1958. In 1964, she played the role of an American movie actress in Francesco Rosi's Italian-Spanish co-production, The Moment of Truth, a film about the life of a bullfighter. She took a liking to the toreros she met during the shooting and romanced one of the most famous of all, Luis Dominguez. When the movie was finished, she returned to Rome and her terraced penthouse atop a high-rise in Parioli, the poshest neighborhood in the Italian capital. She was frequently visited by her bullfighter friends there, some of whom even made her presents on the ears of bulls they'd made slaughter. Mousie, her pet chihuahua, with whom she had been wont to share her bed with ever since she was a puppy, became increasingly jealous of her torero visitors. On one occasion, he tore to tatters one of the bull's ears designed for Linda's collection. Mousie was thrown out of the bed once too often to make room for the bullfighters. The moment of truth came for the jealous Chihuahua in June 1964, when the neurotic pooch, who had been received less and less attention, finally jumped off the terrace in a fit of suicidal canine depression. Canine despair. Oh, Jesus. I didn't know about this one. Oh, now I'm sad. Okay, we gotta move on. I'm sorry, little doggy. Pills and poisons. Pills and poisons. Cowboy star Art Accord was a genuine cowboy. He was half Ute, born in Stillwater, Oklahoma in 1890. As a young man, after a few years spent cowpunching, he joined Dick Stanley's Wild West show and then performed with Buffalo Bill's outfit. Accord started working in movies in 1909 and appeared in DeMille's The Squaw Man. Buck Parvin, the character he played in 1916's series of pictures, was based on Accord himself. He was a born writer. He had an incredible private collection of trophies, a veritable museum, which he took with him wherever he went. Pearl-handled revolvers, silver spurs, 36 silver bridles, hand-carved saddles, and 21 pairs of boots. He served as an infantryman during World War I and won a Croix de Guerre for hand-to-hand fighting. He killed many Germans with his bare hands. He loved fighting on and off screen. When he returned to movies after the war, it was apparent to everyone that Accord and rival cowboy star Hoot Gibson loved to beat each other up. Their fights were legendary. Tim McCoy said, they'd beat the hell out of each other, and they'd come to the bar and have a drink, and they loved it. He was the wildest of all the cowboys, a fantastic sight when he was drunk and angry. Once in a bar, Victor Fleming claimed he was not a real Indian. Accord promptly broke the nose of the future director of Gone with the Wind. He did many serials in the days of Buffalo Bill and the Oregon Trail, worked for Bison, and by the mid-20s was starring in features at Universal. He married Louise Lorraine, his co-star in Oregon Trail. Accord was fearless, stocky and short, and a hard man to kill. On one occasion, he was hospitalized and given up for dead after shooting a scene in which he went over a cliff in horseback, and the horse landed on top of him. Accord starred opposite Fay Wray in William Wyler's first feature, Lazy Lightning, made at the Universal in 1926. Wyler said of him, he was not a great actor, but he had a kind of sense of sincerity. He wasn't handsome, but he looked good on a horse. He was a nice fellow. We got along fine. Accord was the only major Western star who could not make it at all in sound movies. There were voice problems, but vocal training could have remedied them. He was too busy drinking and fighting to worry about his voice, and as a result, he could not get roles in talkies. He served a prison term for rum running, then worked for a while as a miner in Mexico. He lost all his money, but would not agree to the discipline of vocal training. He thought he might be able to make a comeback if he got some publicity, so he staged a phony kidnapping of himself with the help of some Mexican bandits. The plan fell through. When he tried to commit suicide at the Palacio Hotel in Chihuahua, an American buddy knocked the bottle of poison from his hands. But Art had hidden another bottle of cyanide in his room. He may have been a hard man for others to kill, but he was finally able to do it himself. January 4th, 1931. His body rotted in Chihuahua for a week before his family turned up to claim it. Abigail Adams was married to Lyle Talbot, an actor mostly seen as a mobster in Warner Brothers B movies and who later appeared on TV on The Burns and Allen Show. At 27, she divorced Talbot. Columbia still considered her a promising starlet. She didn't want riches, she just wanted to be a star. In 1950, she slashed her wrists and was saved by a hospital intern. She then got engaged to George Jessel, a producer at Fox, widely known as America's Toastmaster General. Adams remained a starlet and became a barfly. Stardom eluded her, but she did make the back pages in 1959 after a large fatal dose of Seconal and ethanol. Jessel observed she had a rather frustrated life, but of course you never know why people do these things. Nick Adams was born Nicholas Aloysius Adamczak in Pennsylvania, the son of a Lithuanian coal miner. He joined the Coast Guard, then later became to Hollywood, hoping to meet his idol James Dean. They did work on a film together, Rebel Without a Cause, in which Adams had a small part. Adams found work in movies during the 50s and 60s, but only achieved some measure of real fame as the star of the TV series The Rebel. He was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor, Oscar for his work in Twilight of Honor and his last good role. He then worked in one of Boris Karloff's least interesting films, Die, Monster, Die, and in another gooseflesh epic that deserves mention, if only for its name, Frankenstein Meets the Giant Devilfish. I've never heard or seen of that movie. Oh my god, I need to see it. When The Rebel was canceled after 2 years, Adams found it difficult to obtain anything but small roles. He was very attached to the two children, Allison and Jeb Stewart, that he had with his actress Nugent, his divorced wife. Adams made headlines when he alleged that Carol, quote, had been allowing a male friend to chastise and discipline the children, although she was unmarried to the said male friend, end quote. He went to court and was given custody of the kids. Their mother was given reasonable visitation nights, but, quote, not in the presence of non-related male adults, end quote. Adams' health began to deteriorate, and a doctor prescribed paraldehyde, a drug used to treat alcoholics with the DTs. And on the night of February 7th, 1968, a buddy, Erwin Roeder, decided to find out why the actor had stood him up from dinner the previous evening. When Roeder arrived at Adams' lonely hillside house in El Roble Lane in Beverly Hills, he found the actor's car in the garage, but there was no sign of life in the house. Roeder broke in a rear window and discovered Johnny Yuma, dead in his bedroom, propped against a wall, his eyes open in a blank stare. The Los Angeles coroner, Thomas Noguchi, performed the autopsy and found paraldehyde in the organs mixed with sedatives and other drugs, enough to cause instant death. Pier Angeli was born in Sardinia in 1932. Her first American movie was Teresa, the story of an Italian girl who marries an American soldier. Her wistful face and natural acting made a strong impression on the public. She remained a leading lady for nearly a decade. Her sister, Marisa Pavin, was then also imported to toil in Tinseltown. Angelico co-starred with Paul Newman twice, in The Silver Chalice and Somebody Up There Likes Me, but she fell in love with James Dean. Her mama did not approve and pushed her into a marriage with singer Vic Damone. Marriage to Damone turned out to be a disaster. After Dean's death, she began to go to pieces. In 1971, she wrote to her friend, I'm so afraid to get old. For me, being 40 is the beginning of old age. Love is now behind me. Love died in a Porsche. Angeli never made it to 40. She offed herself with an overdose of barbiturates in her Beverly Hills apartment, September 11, 1971. Producer Sam Spiegel, On the Waterfront, The Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, Betrayal. Married starlet Lynn Baggett in 1948. 1954, Mrs. Spiegel made headlines when her car slammed into a station wagon filled with boys returning from a summer camp, injuring 4 of its occupants and killing a 5th, 9-year-old Joel Wathick. She fled the scene. She was acquitted of manslaughter but served a 50-day sentence for her hit-and-run driving. Spiegel and Baggett were divorced in 1955. The lady appeared in DOA with Edmund O'Brien in The Times of Their Lives and The Ghost Steps Out. She never became a star. By 1959, her career was seriously flagging. She attempted suicide with sleeping pills and botched it. In a freak accident, 2 months later, she was trapped for 2 days in a folding bed. Oh, jeez. She was undergoing treatment for barbiturate addiction in March 1960 when her nurse found her on her bed, dead from an overdose of sleeping pills. Scotty Beckett, one of the cutest of all screen kiddie actors, was born in Oakland in 1929. He made his movie debut at the age of 3 in Our Gang comedy. He played the young Anthony in Anthony Adverse, appeared as the Dauphin in Marie Antoinette, and as the young Paris Mitchell in King's Row. He was Barbara Stanwyck's son in My Reputation, and the teenaged Al Jolson in the Jolson Story. The first of his many bouts with the law occurred in 1948 when he was arrested for drunken driving. In 1954, he was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1957, he was arrested at the Mexican border for possessing dangerous drugs. In 1960, he was sentenced to a 180-day suspended jail sentence for hitting his stepdaughter with a crutch. Oh my God. He slashed his wrists in 1962, recovered, became a car salesman, and killed himself with sleeping pills in Hollywood on May 10, 1968. Oh my God. Clara Blandick is a household farce, if not a household word. She is known the world over as Judy Garland's kindly Auntie Em in The Wizard of Oz. Born in 1881 aboard an American ship in Hong Kong harbor, she entered films in 1929 and appeared in over 100 movies. She was often a kindly aunt Jackie Coogan's and Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, but she can also play a memorable bitch and is unforgettably nasty as Barbara Stanwyck's mother-in-law in Shopworn. She can also be seen in The Bitter Tea of General Yin, Broadway Bill, Anthony Adverse, Gentleman Jim, and A Stolen Life. On April 15, 1962, she decided she could no longer bear her severe arthritic pains and failing eyesight. The old gal went out and had her hair done, put on her best Sunday frock, and spread out stills and memorabilia from her long career around her apartment. She took a large dose of sleeping pills, and to make sure she would not survive, tied a plastic bag around her head. Auntie M was shortly over the rainbow. No, it's not even funny. All right, we got to keep going here. Charles Boyer was one of screen's great lovers. He was also a fine and restrained actor. After an international career, he settled in Hollywood in 1935. Some of his more memorable roles were in The Garden of Allah, opposite Marlene Dietrich, History is Made at Night, Algiers as Pepe Le Moco, Love Affair, All This in Heaven 2, opposite Bette Davis, and in Lubitsch's Clooney Brown with Jennifer Jones. In 1934, he married British actress Pat Patterson. Their son, Michael, shot himself in 1965 at age 22. Patterson died of cancer in their home in Phoenix. 2 years later, on August 29, 1978, Boyer had killed himself with an overdose of Seconal. Dorothy Dandridge was born in Cleveland in 1923, the daughter of a minister. She and her sister Vivian learned singing from their mother, and at the age of 4, little Dorothy began her showbiz career as a half song and dance act called as half of a song and dance act called The Wonder Children. She made her screen debut at Days at the Races with the Marx Brothers. She was one of the first black performers to attain real stardom in mainstream American motion pictures. This occurred in the 50s, with 2 films directed by Otto Preminger, Carmen Jones, and Porgy and Bess. In the latter, Dandridge played Bess. Although her voice was dubbed by Adele Addison, in Carmen Jones, she was dubbed by Marilyn Horne. In 1963, she went bankrupt after losing all of her money in a get-rich-quick oil investment scam. On September 8, 1965, the 41-year-old actress was found dead on the bathroom floor of her Sunset Strip Hollywood apartment. A large quantity of sleeping pills had cured her of her amnesia for all eternity. Alan Ladd carved a niche for himself as one of the screen's memorable tough guys, in spite of his short height and a generally stone-faced acting style. He entered pictures as an extra and remained a bit player for years, getting nowhere and beat quickies at Republic and Monogram. He owed his first big break to the persistence of his second wife, Agent Sue Carroll, who kept pushing for him. In 1942, she landed him an important role in Paramount's This Gun for Hire. It was a good little thriller with Veronica Lake. Female fans by the droves fell for Ladd's image of sensitivity combined with ruthlessness. His next appearance at Paramount, again with Lake in The Glass Key, confirmed his popularity. He was co-starred with Loretta Young, Dorothy Lamour, and Deborah Kerr, and by 1947 was one of the country's top 10 movie stars. He will probably be best remembered for his work in George Stevens' Shane, 1953, the climax of his career in which he scored a huge success in the role of a mysterious gunfighter. His career declined after Shane, and sadly most of the later films were routine actioners. Ladd's drinking problems, which reached serious proportions at this time, was no secret in Hollywood. In '63, while searching for a suspected prowler late at night on his ranch, he shot himself in the chest. A year after this incident, which was in ill likelihood a botched suicide attempt, Ladd got it right. January 29, 1964, at the age of 50, he did himself in with a high level of alcohol combined with 3 medicines and sleeping pills. His mother had committed suicide in 37. Shapely blonde Carol Landis rose to stardom in Hal Roach's 1 Million BC, which she played a primitive cave woman. Plenty of young men had that poster on their wall growing up, I can tell you. Her 1948 4th of July suicide provoked by unrequited love for Rex Harrison caused a hullabaloo and a half for Mr. and Mrs. Moviegoer. Rex found Carol's body lying on the bathroom floor of her Pacific Palisades home, her head resting on a jewel box, one hand clutching a crumpled envelope that still contained a sleeping pill. On the vanity table of her bedroom was a suicide note addressed to her mother. At the time, Harrison was married to Lily Palmer. He had dined with Landis the night of her suicide. Landis was married to Broadway producer W. Horace Schmidlap. When informed that his wife had been found dead, Mr. W. Horace Schmidlap said, "Oh, my God." I don't know the point of that last line. Mary McDonald was dubbed the body by Tinseltown press agents, and the name stuck. There was not much to be said about her acting talent. The lady was a former model and showgirl from Kentucky who turned up in such memorable movies as Pardon My Sarong and Getting Gertie's Garter. She was married 7 times and was quoted as saying, "Husbands are easier to find than good agents." Even good agents could not build her into a true star. January 1957, she was found in her pajamas on a desert road near Indo, California. She said she had been kidnapped from a house by 2 men. The affair was clearly a publicity stunt to boost her sagging career. Soon afterwards, she was arrested on drug charges, then for drug driving. In 1963, while on tour in Australia, she suffered a nervous breakdown. She was arrested later that year on a charge of forging Percodan prescriptions. In October 65, she obtained some more Percodan, enough to kill herself with, which she did. Maggie McNamara was born in New York in 1928. A successful fashion model while still in her teens, she twice appeared on the cover of Life. After starring in Moon is Blue on Broadway, the diminutive and sensitive brunette made her movie debut in 1953 in Otto Preminger's controversial screen version of that play, in which she was seen as a stubborn virgin fending off the advances of William Holden. The Breen office refused to pass the movie unless the word virgin was eliminated. The Catholics condemned it from the pulpits. Preminger refused to cut the movies, and United Artists helped him to break the power of the Breen office by agreeing to distribute it without a production code seal. It was a smash hit. McNamara was nominated for a Best Actress Academy Award. She went on to make Three Coins in the Fountain and Prince of Players. She then disappeared from the screen, divorced her husband, director David Swift, suffered a nervous breakdown. She made a brief return to the movies in '63 when Preminger cast her in a small role in The Cardinal. She worked for a while as typist. In February 1978, she killed herself with an overdose of sleeping pills. She left a suicide note, and the coroner's report mentioned that she had had a history of mental illness. It is surely fortuitous, but Otto Preminger holds the record for the director with the highest number of suicides among his leading ladies: McNamara, Dorothy Dandridge, and Jean Seberg. Enough ink has been spilled in speculation of murderous foul play in the death of Marilyn Monroe. Theodore J. Cuffrey, the chief medical examiner in 1962, concluded on the basis of the autopsy performed by pathologist Thomas J. Noguchi, then a young medical examiner, that the star had died from an overdose of Nembutal and chloral hydrate pills. In 1982, 20 years later, in spite of the intervening fuss, Noguchi still considered Monroe's suicide very probable. As yet, nothing has been revealed that would seriously refute his conclusion. Oh boy. We still got a lot to go here. We're going to do this. Chester Morris was born in New York in 1901. Both his parents were successful stars on the stage. The DeMille family and the Morris family were old friends. It was Cecil B. DeMille who gave Chester Morris his first screen role. As an extra in The Road to Yesterday, it was D.W. Griffith who gave him his first crack at a leading role. Griffith proposed to him director Roland West for the starring part in Alibi. It turned out to be a brilliant gangster... Hold on, they didn't print this. Hold on. It turned out to be a brilliant gangster movie, with Morris nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for his performance as Chick Williams, an amoral crook who marries a cop's daughter. The actor scored again with his forceful performance as a conviction in MGM's The Big House. Chester Morris rapidly developed into an attractive, charismatic, and thoroughly professional actor who never gave a bad performance, but somehow never managed to become a major star. He proved an effective foil for Jean Harlow in Red-Headed Woman. In Blind Alley, made in Columbia in 1939, he was superb as an insane escaped killer. He became the mainstay of the popular Boston Blackie series, Be Quickies, in which he appeared in 1941 to 1949. He appeared as Blackie in 14 movies. His best film of all was Roland West's ingenious thriller The Bat Whisperers in 1930, in which he appeared as a detective and a murderous psychopath. His last film was The Great White Hope, 1970, which was released shortly after his suicide. Morris had been touring in a stage production of The Caine Mutiny. To an interviewer who had questioned him about his role as Queeg, he replied, "Captain Queeg is a complete paranoiac. He's a strange man, so offbeat. I like that kind of role. Anybody can play nice boys." The actor was suffering from stomach cancer. He was a professional enough to continue on the boards as long as he could, but on September 11, 1970, when the end seemed near, Morris killed himself with an overdose of barbiturates in the Holiday Inn at New Hope, Pennsylvania, near the Bucks County Playhouse where he was appearing in Caine. Coffee. Oh my God, I got this. Ona Munson began her showbiz career as a dancer in vaudeville after a successful run in No No Nanette on Broadway. She made her movie debut in 1930. She had small but good roles in Mervyn LeRoy's Five-Star Final in 1931, in which she appeared with Edwin G. Robinson and Boris Karloff, but most of her films during the rest of the 30s were routine tripe. Although what seemed to be the big break of her life came with the role of Rhett Butler's pal, the prostitute Belle Waitling in Gone with the Wind, the part did not lead to much else of note. Her only other role of significance in Tinseltown was that of another madam, Madame Jin Sling in Joseph von Sternberg's The Shanghai Gesture. Lacquered to the hilt and pulling to the strings of the outrageous melodrama while she observed her puppets with a mask-like visage, Munson was sensational in this stylish movie, but it was not a hit, and it all led to a few low-budgeted westerns. On February 11, 1955, she left a suicide note in which she spoke of her desire to obtain freedom, and she obtained it with a massive overdose of sleeping pills. In the mid-40s, it seemed obvious that Gail Russell had a great career ahead of her. The beautiful young woman with blue eyes and jet black hair went straight from Santa Monica High into a contract with Paramount. She scored a success in her first starring film, The Uninvited. The Uninvited, an effective ghost tale in which she appeared opposite Ray Milland. I can say that was actually one of my grandmother's favorite movies. Things looked even brighter after her fine performances in The Unseen and Night Has 1,000 Eyes. Russell was, however, severely neurotic, and then pressures on early stardom in Tinseltown abetted her penchant for alcoholism. She was arrested time and again for drunken driving. In 1954, she divorced her Humpty Dumpty, Guy Madison, after a few suicide attempts. Her movie career became a mere memory, and in August 1961, she was found dead at age 36 in her West Hollywood apartment. Her corpse was surrounded by empty vodka bottles and empty tubes of barbiturates. On July 3, 1906, an event of major importance took place in St. Petersburg, Russia. A child of dazzling beauty and infinite charm was being born, according to George Sanders. The child, of course, was George Sanders. The parents of this ever-modest actor were both born in Russia but out of Scottish ancestry. His father was the best balalaika player in town when they fled the Bolshevik Revolution and settled in England. Most of their relatives remained in Russia or were shot. After leaving school, Sanders got a job with the tobacco company in Argentina and spent much time in the brothels of Buenos Aires. After his return to London, he appeared in several plays, then made his screen debut as a god, riding a horse in The Man Who Could Work Miracles. He married Zsa Zsa Gabor, then later her sister Magda. He had 4 wives and 7 psychiatrists. Most of his later movies were crappy. The only role of interest during the last decade of his life was that of a drag queen in the Kremlin Letter. His friend Brian Aherney wrote that Sanders pursued women solely for their money, dropping them instantly if he found they were not rich enough. On April 25, 1972, he killed himself in Barcelona with 5 tubes of Nebutal. The suicide note read, "Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored. I'm leaving you with your worries in the sweet cesspool." Gia Scala was born in Liverpool, England in 1934 of an Italian father and an Irish mother. She studied drama with Stella Adler in New York and made her film debut in 1955 in Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows, supporting Jane Wyman and Rock Hudson. The attractive green-eyed brunette played leading roles in American and English films during the next decade. They included The Garment Jungle, The Tunnel of Love, and The Guns of Navarone with Gregory Peck and David Niven. Oscar-winning actors. In 1957, she was taken into police custody in London when a taxi driver found her on Waterloo Bridge. Friends said she planned to throw herself into the Thames after brooding over the death of her mother. In the early 70s, she took to drinking heavily, smoking marijuana immoderately, and attempting suicide to escape unhappy memories of her stalled career and her broken marriage with a stockbroker, Don Burnett. On February 7, 1971, she ate roach poison and came so close to death she was given last rites by a priest. Later that year, a friend reported that he had not visited her home for some time without finding her drunk, and that she had been offered friends knives and asked them to stab her as a favor. She collected police citations for drunkenness and one for taking a stroll in public in Hollywood clad with only a pair of panties on. In May 1971, she was sent by a judge to State Hospital for a psychiatric examination after she collapsed in a Ventura courtroom during an appearance on a drunk driving charge. 2 months later, she was fined $125 and placed on 2 years probation for disturbing the peace. The conviction stemmed from a brawl with a parking attendant over a bill of 50 cents. Her probation report stated, mental health questionable. Her money is being wasted on liquor, and it is feared that she may drink herself to death. The probation officer added, her nature appears to have been bizarre for quite some time. The judge appointed a conservator to countersign all checks written by Gia Scala. She was then injured when her sports car overturned on a road near Hollywood. On April 30th, 1972, she killed herself by absorbing a large amount of drugs washed down with a vast quantity of booze. Her body was discovered by one of the 3 men staying in her home. Gene Seberg's saga had already inspired a ton of press articles, magazine pieces, books, video bios, and most recently a musical tragedy called Gene Seberg, staged by the British National Theatre in London, at least according to this book's publication. The subject of all this attention was that an Iowa college girl when Otto Preminger chose her to star in his Saint Joan. The movie bombed. The critics were not kind to the young Iowan. Preminger then stuck her in Bonjour Tristesse. Her career might have ended there had it not been for her appearance in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, the French New Wave movie that provoked a good deal of critical brouhaha. Seberg's only Seberg only made one more American film of any interest, Robert Rossen's Lilith, in which she vividly portrayed a catatonic bisexual. Seberg's husband at the time, novelist Roman Gary, claimed that the FBI was directly responsible for her death. The baby died at birth. She was transported... Wait, hold on a sec here. That's the page. All right, I'm just going to move on here. You can look up that character. I'm moving on. Something's wrong with the page. Red-haired, freckled Everett Sloane, who became one of Hollywood's best and highest salaried character actors, was born in New York and started his career in radio. By an odd coincidence, he was heard for quite some time as a Jewish son, Sammy Goldberg, on the popular The Goldberg series, and then played Hitler in over 100 different radio shows. That's interesting. He joined Orson Welles' Mercury Theater in 1938 and came to Hollywood with Welles. He gave an extremely moving performance in his screen debut as Bernstein in Citizen Kane and was equally fine as Kopechine, the armaments man, in Journey into Fear. He was even better as Arthur Bannister, the important husband of the lady from Shanghai with Rita Hayworth, in Welles's memorable flop. Sloane's last two movie roles were in supporting of Jerry Lewis. Sloane was going blind, and on July 11, 1965, he put the lights out on an impressive career with a handful of sleeping pills in his West Hollywood home. Inger Stevens appeared in 13 movies and was not very interesting in any of them. She was born in Sweden, the child of a broken home. She came to the States with her father and at 16 ran away from daddy and made her showbiz debut in a tacky Kansas City burlesque house. She then came to New York and became a chorine at the Latin Quarter. She studied at the Actors Studio and then attained some popularity on the TV series The Farmer's Daughter. Her movie debut came in 1957 in Man on Fire. Her bumpy romance with co-star Bing Crosby briefly made headlines. She married her agent. The marriage lasted 4 months. She confessed to a friend, "I often feel depressed. I come from a broken home, my marriage was a disaster, and I'm constantly lonely." In her penultimate movie, House of Cards, she looked like a pale zombie. She saw in the new year on January 1st, 1959, by swallowing 25 sleeping pills, a part of a bottle of ammonia. But the suicide attempt failed. On May 1st, 1970, she did not take any chances. She gulped down an enormous quantity of barbiturates. She was discovered still alive by the girlfriend with whom she shared her Laurel Canyon home, but died on the way to the hospital. Margaret Sullivan was one of the most enchanting and magnetic leading ladies in the history of Tinseltown. Her acting was marked by intelligence and honesty. She was also a very fucked up lady. Insecure, temperamental, neurotic. She loathed acting. The family biography written by her daughter, Brooke Hayward, is significantly entitled Haywire. Her best performances were in Frank Borzage's, however you say his name, Three Comrades, with Robert Taylor and Lionel Atwell, and The Mortal Storm, and Lubitsch's enchanting The Shop Around the Corner. A co-star in MGM's Cry Havoc, a 1943 war epic about army nurses on baton, she noted that she kept popping pills all during the making of the movie. In 1956, she walked out of rehearsals of a TV show in which she was starring into a private sanatorium in Massachusetts. In 1959, she decided to return to the stage and was appearing in a New Haven tryout of Sweet Love Remembered, prior to Broadway. On New Year's Day, 1960, during the run of the play, she killed herself with an overdose of sleeping pills in the Taft Hotel in New Haven. Lupe Velez, the Mexican Spitfire, which I've talked about in Hollywood Babylon 1, was one of Hollywood's livest wires. He was born in Maria Guadalupe Velez de Villalobos, south of the border, educated in San Antonio, convent, and broke into films in 1926. She made a great impression at the tempestuous leading lady in Doug Fairbanks' The Guacho. She livened up D.W. Griffith's Lady of the Pavements considerably, all the while enjoying a well-rounded private life after an affair with John Gilbert, and she took up with young buck Gary Cooper. She married Tarzan the Ape Man, Johnny Weissmuller, in 1933, and after their divorce went through a small army of lovers, cowboys, stuntmen, and American gigolos. Her career hit the skids, and in later years she mostly appeared in a series of B comedies with the dreary Leon Errol. In 1944, deeply in debt and pregnant by her most recent lover, Harold Raymond, Lupe staged her last night on Earth with care. She ordered a huge mass of flowers, invited 2 girlfriends for a last supper, and then at 3 a.m. found herself alone in her big fake hacienda on Rodeo Drive. Her bedroom was chock-a-block with gardenias and tuberoses. It glowed with the flicker of several dozen candles. In this shrine to her own death, La Lupe, gowned in silver lame, penciled a farewell note to the father of the fetus, opened a bottle of Seconal and swallowed 75 of the little buggers. She's laid down on the bed, hands clasped in prayer, in what she envisioned as a final photo tableau of exquisite beauty. That photo was never to be taken. The second all did not go down well with her spicy Last Supper. She puked, leaving a trail of vomit from the bed to the bathroom, where she slipped on the tiles and plunged headfirst into the toilet. Juanita, the chambermaid, discovered his mistress's corpse later that morning. The tableau was neither pretty nor vivant. 1917, George Westmore found the first movie makeup department in cinema history. He'd spawned a lot more, the entire Westmore dynasty, which over the years took over the makeup departments of Universal, Warner Brothers, RKO, Paramount, and Selznick. Perk Westmore, who presided at Warner's for many years, married the beautiful star of They Won't Forget, Gloria Dixon, who was later killed in a fire. Bud, handsomest of George's sons, reigned over the powder puffs of Universal and found the time and inclination to wed Martha Ray. La Ray slept with a gun under her pillow on their wedding night, just in case her husband tried to get fresh with her. This was obviously not a marriage destined to last long. It didn't, and Buddy Boy soon found a more satisfactory life of wedded bliss with Rosemary Lane. Daddy George taught his identical twin sons, Perk and Ern. Who names their kid that? Good God, that's a joke. Twin sons, Perk and Ern? Yeah, whatever. They taught them wig making when they were only 9. George and his son Mont did all the makeup on DeMille's King of Kings, which was not an easy job, since H.B. Warner DeMille's Christ of Christ was an inveterate boozer who turned up each morning smashed and woozy, not exactly the best shape to have this saintly visage applied. It was Mont Westmore who plucked and reshaped Rudolph Valentino's eyebrows, put Vaseline on his lips to make them shine, and gave Rudy his distinctive slick-back hairstyle and sideburns cut at an angle. When King of Kings was in the can, Old Man George opened up a salon on Hollywood Boulevard, convinced that he would be the makeup czar of Tinseltown. It turned out that all of the stars preferred Westmore sons to Westmore Papa. George went to pieces. He found it unendurable to be his son's rival. He had expected to be named the head of Paramount's enlarged makeup department in 26. The job went to his 20-year-old son, Wally, instead. Oh, not Perk and Ern? Whatever. George then was sure he was going to be named to head the department at RKO, but that job went to his son, Ern. In 31, Ern was awarded an Oscar for his makeup work on Cimarron. The old wig maker wigged out permanently. A few weeks after Ern got his Oscar, George Westmore drowned a potion of bichloride of mercury and died after 4 days of agony as the chemicals gnawed at its way through his guts. Oh my God. Okay, Grant Withers was born in Pueblo, Colorado in 1904 and came to California in the early 20s as a reporter for the Los Angeles Record. Then entered films in 26. He starred in some A pictures but was soon relegated to serials, low-budget action pictures and supporting roles. He often worked for John Ford. Films Jungle Jim, Mr. Wrong, Detective, Tennessee Johnson, The Fighting Seabees, My Darling Clementine, Fort Apache, Rio Grande, and The Sun Shines Bright. His principal claim to fame, however, was in his 1930 elopement with the 17-year-old Loretta Young, who was then a wampus baby star. It caused a press sensation. The marriage was annulled the following year. John Wayne was best man when Withers married his fifth wife, Cuban dancer Estelida Rodriguez. Toward the end of his life, his activity was largely confined to minor TV roles. On March 28, 1959, his corpse was found in his North Hollywood bachelor apartment, in bed wearing eyeglasses and holding the telephone receiver. Withers had killed himself with an overdose of sleeping pills. He left a note which read, "Please forgive me, my family. I was so unhappy. It's better this way. Thanks to all my friends. I'm sorry I let you down." His landlord said he had been despondent because of his financial problems. Loretta Young, informed of her ex-husband's death after she returned home from Good Friday church services, stated, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm not sure how to interpret that. I'll let you all use your imagination on that one. The Razor's Edge, the popular comedy team of Bobby Clark and Paul McCullough, scored on Broadway in the 20s, first in Irving Berlin's Music Box Revue, then in The Ramblers. They had been boyhood friends and first appeared together as circus clowns and then in burlesque. Clark's trademark was a pair of glasses painted on his face. McCullough supported a droll toothbrush mustache. They made a few hilarious one-reel comedies for Fox, shot in New York, which were so successful that the studio brought the team to Hollywood to star in a series of talkie featurettes. Their films of the early 30s, made at RKO, were filled with outrageous gags. The most notable films of this period were In Pig's Eye, In the Devil's Doghouse, Melon Drama, and above all, Odor in the Court, as zanily nihilistic as anything produced by the Marx Brothers. After a heavy work schedule at RKO in 1935, immediately followed by a stage tour in George White's Sandals, McCullough collapsed from nervous exhaustion. He sent himself into a Massachusetts sanatorium. By March 36, he appeared to have recovered. Clark came to drive him home. On the way, McCullough casually remarked that he needed a shave. The car pulled up to a barber shop. McCullough entered and chatted good-humoredly with the barber. He sat down in the chair, but before he could be lathered, he had left his world. His eyes had fallen to the glittery, straight razor the barber had just honed and placed on the sink. The comedian picked it up and slit his throat from ear to ear. And that is the end of that very long, very sad chapter. Thank you for sticking with me.